Hello everybody, welcome to a glorious British autumn evening. The sun is setting and once again I have my 1999 Ferrari 550 Maranello back on the driveway. The car forever after known as Judas. This is a real dream purchase of mine. I've always wanted a 550 and I've owned this one now for just over 2 years. However, in the last year I haven't really seen it at all. So today I'm going to tell you what's been going on, why it was away for quite so long, and of course the bit you all want to know, how much has it cost and will I now be selling it because of that. But before that, something very important to say. I want to say a big thanks to you, regardless of whether this is the first video of mine that you're tuning into, or you were there 6 years ago when I picked up my Lotus Evora 400 and began this journey. Because not only does your viewership and feedback genuinely mean an awful lot to me, it of course has let me live this rather crazy lifestyle that I now have, and also when cars like this throw me big bills, allow me to pay for it without having to resort to any crazy, totally out of nowhere sponsor videos that aren't related to car stuff at all. Oh, excuse me a moment. Oh, sorry, that's Ferrari. The F12's in, and with luck, that's not going to cost anywhere near as much as this. So very rude of me, I know, but I'll take this, and you can watch the credits, okay? Hello? Yeah. Oh, okay. Does it? Right. Is that expensive? It is. Oh. I want to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, HelloFresh. Cooking is a real passion of mine, something I've been trying to get back into for quite a while. So much so, I've actually made it a big part of my new second channel, JAYEMM FRIENDS, but you know what it's like. Sometimes it sounds a lot easier than it really is. Happily, there is a solution, and that's HelloFresh. They offer a huge range of meals that cater to all tastes that are delivered to your door in nice, easy to cook form. They come complete with a recipe card, and today, for my lunch, I'm having Mexican-style beef and kidney bean hash. I've genuinely loved using HelloFresh because not only are the meals tasty, but they also come delivered in exactly the portion sizes that you require, and that means you reduce your food waste, which is something I've been trying to do quite a bit. And even if you're an absolute novice in the kitchen, these cards are so easy to follow that you can create a tasty meal from scratch in no time at all, with a complete meal taking as little as 20 minutes. Even better, follow the link in the description down below or use my code JAYEMM when signing up for a special deal. Get 50% off your first box, 35% off the next 3, and 3 free gifts. Time and geographical limitations may apply. That's the tastiest sponsor deal I've ever had. Cheers, HelloFresh. So, to bring everybody up to speed, a quick piece on the 550 in general. If you know all this stuff already, you can skip ahead to the main bit, which will be at this time code here. Back in the 1990s, the Ferrari model lineup was a lot simpler thing. You had the 348 as the original entry-level V8, which morphed into the rather brilliant F355. The four-seater for much of the decade was the 456, and then for particularly well-heeled customers, you started with the last years of production for the F40, and later on, we saw the introduction of the F50. However, it was for the flagship 12 cylinders that the biggest shakeup was had, because 2 decades of mid-engine flat 12 Ferrari came to an end with the introduction of the 550. And journalists weren't all that happy about that, because the lineup that had started with the 365 GT4 BB that morphed into the 512 BB and then eventually the Testarossa was ended. And people were rather attached to those cars. So when this was introduced and presented to the public, many were somewhat sceptical. However, Ferrari's new boss of the time, Luca de Montezemolo, had a plan. He wanted to bring back the halcyon days of the 1960s, where the flagship Ferrari was a front-engine V12 Grand Tourer, and this was the car to do it. Luca wanted a car that was not just gorgeous and a feat of engineering, but also genuinely practical. And the template laid down by the 550 established the groundwork for every car up until the 812 Superfast. Up front, you have a gorgeous, naturally aspirated, large volume V12. In the middle, just the 2 seats, and drive sent to the rear. And I happen to believe that what Ferrari created is one of their all-time greats, alongside the F355 of the time. The chassis is somewhat conventional, a steel tubular affair related to the 456. The skin is aluminium, as is Ferrari tradition. Though Jeremy Clarkson at the time drew comparison with the Mark IV Toyota Supra, I think anybody with functional eyes can agree this is a much better looking car, and it certainly didn't lack for firepower. In an era where a Golf GTI made just about 150 horsepower, this had more than triple, 485. In spite of the car having no variable valve timing, a trick arrangement for the air intake gave this 420 pound-foot of torque, or to put it another way, double that of a Honda NSX from the time. And it handled too. So much so that in his VHS Apocalypse Clarkson, Jeremy and co dubbed this the greatest handling car in the world ever. In fact, it's such a good car that when Aston Martin were developing the Vanquish, they bought one to benchmark. And I spoke to one of the Vanquish development team, who said that when their test driver went out in a 550, he came back and threw the keys down, declaring they were going to have a near impossible time trying to match what Ferrari had achieved. Even 20 years on, I think this is a stunning machine. It really ticks all the boxes. Powerful V12 engine, manual gearbox, gorgeous leather interior, yes, sticky switches as well. I think classic styling, and it's rare too. Ferrari made just 3,083 of these coupes and about 450 so of the oddball Barchetta, though that probably isn't actually as good a car as this. I never really thought I'd ever be able to afford something like this, because back in the 90s, this was a £150,000 car. At the time, I was living in a house that cost half that. However, life has a funny way of turning out sometimes, and now I am very glad to say that this is one of 3 Ferraris that I own. But it is my first and will always be a very, very special car. A long time ago, I made myself 2 promises. First off, that if I were ever in that lucky position to buy a Ferrari, it would be one that I wanted. I never wanted to be someone that bought some old snotter that had a prancing horse on the front just to say they had a Ferrari. For me, when it comes to dream cars, it really has to be the dream. And the 550 is it. The other was that when I was able to achieve that dream, I would use the car. I've known so many people that have gorgeous things like this and simply lock them away all year round, never to enjoy them. For me, the whole point of cars like this is to share them. It's the reason I started this YouTube channel. And I'm very happy to say that on both counts, I have managed to keep my promise. This car is the dream. It's in Rosso Corsa, which I'll confess would not have been my first choice. I probably would have preferred a blue, or maybe a green, perhaps even a yellow if I was feeling fruity. But still, the 550 wears it extremely well. The interior is cream, or crema if you so prefer, and the carpets are Bordeaux. That colour combination is a favourite of the Ferrari importer of the time, Maranello concessionaires. Back in the 1990s, Ferrari UK wasn't a concept that existed. I've also managed to put plenty of miles on it, but not quite as many as the first owner, who was an absolute legend. As far as I can tell from my research, they owned something along the lines of a sort of Butlins type holiday park, and in the first 3 years of this car's life, it accrued 60,000 miles. Someone did 20,000 miles a year in this car. I'll let you into a little secret. Every now and again, when I'm driving about, I'll put on a 90s radio station and I'll pretend that I'm him. Some big CEO type blasting up and down the A1 in their brand new Ferrari. He must have felt like a king. I know I do. Anyway, after he sold the car, it was used a little less, more in line with how you'd expect a Ferrari to be. So by the time I acquired it, it was on 92,000 miles. Now, I'm very happy to say, it is on 6 figures. This car is currently sat at just over 104,000 miles. It is that mileage really that made this car affordable, despite it being in what I think many would term the ideal specification. There were options for these cars, but not really all that many to choose from. You could have some bucket seats if you like, which I think are quite cool, some bits of carbon fibre too, which in a 550 I think would just look out of place, and a diamond quilted shelf for the back. But this doesn't have any of that, nor does it need it. At one point in time, a cheap 550 would have been about £35,000, but that was near 20 years ago when £35,000 was a lot more money. Later on, it was more like about £50,000, which in my head was always the figure I wanted to pay. However, by the time I found myself in the position to buy my first Ferrari, sadly, 50 grand was no longer going to get you a good one. These days, about £100,000 is kind of market average for a low mile example, but this one I paid about 74. And I'm very grateful to its previous owner Nick for agreeing to sell it to me for what really was at the time quite a good price. and it certainly seemed like a good deal when you consider the fact that he'd had an independent spend some £17,000 on this car doing a whole bunch of stuff, from fairly small little items up to and including the clutch, which on a 550 is a fairly big item. So I bought it in the hope that really there wouldn't be all that much to do, and indeed in the first year I did some 10,000 miles and noted there were a few things I wanted to tend to, but overall it seemed to be a very good car. It seems though that my optimism was somewhat misplaced, because when this car went in for its big cam belt service and to tend to some of the small items I'd found, like an oil leak, it actually had quite a few more problems. That oil leak was actually caused by failed camshaft seals, so a lot of work had to be done. The engine was stripped apart. I decided to get some cosmetic stuff sorted. We also began the Ferrari Premium program, which replaces a whole bunch of different pipework through the car, including often forgotten stuff like brake, fuel and coolant lines, and by the time they were done, I'd spent over £10,000 on the car. The next step was then to take it through the Classiche program, which normally is quite expensive and not the kind of thing that I would do. However, if you have completed the Ferrari Premium program, Classiche is then relatively inexpensive, under £1,000. That is the factory's scheme for certifying older cars and saying essentially that they are as original as they came from the factory, or certainly with Ferrari approved parts on. This was so close to original that it was pretty easy to get it through, and because Ferrari themselves said if I wanted to do it I could pick up my certificate from the factory, I said yes. You see, Classiche is the sort of thing that you see attached to 250 GTOs, F40s and F50s, that kind of thing. It's not something I ever considered myself being able to do. I didn't think I'd ever have a car that was worthy, but Ferrari were very keen to tell me that no, any old Ferrari can indeed be worthy, and well, you get a nice red folder with it, and I'm a real sucker for nicely presented paperwork, so yes, I said, Ferrari, I would love to do the Classiche thing. So we said, okay, next time the car needs to come in, we'll get the process started proper, and next year you'll go get your certificate. Everything's good, right? No. As ever, the plan seemed so simple. The car was back with me, and other than a couple of small issues like the fact that the smell of petrol had returned to it, everything was going fine. So I had a Ferrari themed trip to do, as that was at the end of the year in sort of October, November time. I thought I'll do that, then I can take the car over to Meridian to fix the petrol issue, do the Classiche process in no particular rush, and then the car will come back in early spring, ready for me to use and enjoy again. That was last November. I dropped it off, and it's only just returned in September. What went wrong? Well, when I dropped the car off, Meridian immediately said to me, "Can't you hear that noise?" To which I said, "No, not really. I'm inside the car, not outside. What do you mean?" They said, "There's a bit of a rattling in there. We'll investigate it." I didn't really think all that much of it. A few days later, I got a phone call, and it was one of those calls you don't really want. They said, "We've got some bad news." I asked Chris over at Meridian whether I should sit down for this news, and he responded by saying, "Do you have any gin?" So that told me the kind of news I was going to expect. It turns out my oil pump was in the process of failing. One part of it had actually already seized, though the more troubling piece was that another part of it had totally and utterly destroyed a bearing. The bearing itself was gone, and that's the problem. Where's it gone? The only place it could have gone is into the oil, and then into the engine. It may not surprise you to hear that a new engine for a 550 is quite expensive. Think about £30,000 to £40,000. That's £30,000 to £40,000 that I don't have. Cue one of the most nerve-wracking weeks of my life, as I awaited the call from Meridian to tell me whether any damage had been done. Eventually, the phone rang, and after staring at it for 10 minutes, I picked it up. Happily, it was good news. A filter in the engine had done its job and caught all of the bearing. They counted every individual ball, all were present and correct. No damage had been done. Yes, it was going to be an extra few £1,000s that I hadn't wanted to spend, but when your head was filled with thoughts of a £30,000 or £40,000 bill, a £3,000 or £4,000 bill suddenly seems a lot more reasonable. Phew, I thought, that's a close one. Let's get the car back together, let's carry on with the Classiche process, do what we came here to do, and get on with it. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Things certainly seemed to be heading in the right direction. To get the car through the Classiche process, it only needed 2 changes. First was that I had to refit the original stereo that I got with the car. It isn't actually original to a 550, but is a genuine Ferrari part from about 20 years ago. So, by the terms of Classiche, that is acceptable. The other, and I know Jack from number 27 is going to hate me for this, is that I had to return the exhaust to standard. It was mostly standard anyway. However, the center section had been replaced with one that had been gutted. It was just 2 pieces of straight pipe where it should have a silencer. I managed to source a genuine used part for that. It didn't cost very much, a few £100, and that was it. But not long after, I got another phone call, which I thought was going to be the "your car's done, pay this bill and come and get it" call. But it was not. Meridian had more bad news. When they'd fixed the oil pump, the sump had to come off. And when doing that, they noticed that previously somebody had made an absolute mess of one of the studs on the engine. This is likely because it sits just above a chassis rail in a rather awkward place. And rather than do it properly or use the correct tool, which is not a specialist Ferrari item, just a normal Halford's 15 quid job, they just cross-threaded the whole thing and absolutely destroyed the stud. As a result, Meridian weren't 100% sure that the sump really was going to be properly refitted. Yes, there are lots of other bolts there, but when it comes to something as important as holding the oil in your engine, do you really want to take a shortcut? They investigated all possible options and unfortunately came to the conclusion that really the only way to do it was to do it properly. The stud had to be drilled out and replaced. Sadly, because of where it is, they did look at various different options, but decided that really the only way to do it properly without risking damage to anything else was to take the engine out. Now, I know people talk about taking the engine out in a 355 when you do the cam belts, but the thing is with that car, it's actually meant to come out. The whole thing is designed, the subframe comes out in one neat and very cool looking piece. It's built that way. A 550 is not. As part of Luca's mantra for this car, trying to make it easier to maintain, there is no job here really that requires the engine to come out, at least during normal maintenance. So it's a bugger. To get the engine in a 550 out, you start at the back, because this has a gearbox at the rear in transaxle configuration. So, first thing you do, drop the gearbox. Then you take the torque tube out, then you take the bell housing out, and then you can get to the engine. The actual work to repair the stud didn't take long at all. I think on my bill, it's about £100. But to remove and refit the engine is 2.5 days labour, which is expensive. Now, it's at times like this where I have to let a little bit of ogmios into my life, take on that Zen Motoring vibe, because otherwise, what am I going to do? Get angry? Who's that going to benefit? Absolutely nobody. Let's not mess about. I am a very lucky chap. I'm lucky to have this, and I'm lucky that the bill I was presented was one that I could pay. I can't even blame Ferrari for this one. Meridian didn't do it. They take responsibility if they did. We don't know who did. It was probably done 15 years ago. Taking the sump off isn't something you have to do on a regular basis. I'm almost certain the person that put it back on probably didn't admit to the owner at the time what they had done. And no inspection ever would have revealed that as a problem. The car has been into many places since and no one has noticed it. You never would have done until the sump came off. Okay, I had some bad luck with the oil pump failing, but you know, it's a 23-year-old car with 104,000 miles on the clock that cost 150 grand when new. This was a serious high-performance car of its day. Heck, it's a high-performance car of this day. It's not a bad piece of Ferrari design that the engine is so difficult to get out, because they designed it that you don't have to get the engine out for normal stuff. Woosah. That's all I can do. What else am I going to do? And, in all honesty, it's not like my Ferraris have got a monopoly on costing me far more money than I would like. My S2000 still needs a new engine. I'm working on that. There'll be an update when there's an update, but that's going to be the thick end of 15,000 quid. And in the last year, my Celica has probably cost me just about as much as this. Also, an update coming soon. But it was happily at this point in time where my fairy godmother suddenly got her wings into gear, because when the engine came out, I did have to ask that eternal question. While it's out, what else do we need to do? And the list that came back was very, very small. There was a really tiny patch of corrosion down here in a place you never would have seen without the engine out of the car. So I suppose in some ways that's a good thing. They recommended that I replace the flywheel. The clutch was still in good condition, but the flywheel was not. So that was another item, about £600 or so, that didn't cost any extra in labour to fit because the flywheel was already out. We also put a new aircon condenser in at about 300 or 400 quid. We replaced the neck on the washer filler bottle, did a few other little bits, and James, the mechanic that's been working on this, who is a star, thank you James, also did a lot tidying up the engine bay so it now looks absolutely pristine. All in all, as you might expect, the car is now in the best condition it has ever been. But how much has this all cost me? I know you want to know. All of those little extras, they came to about £2,000. The entire job in total, just under 12. Yeah, 2.5 years with my dream car, and in total it's cost me, aside from the running costs, fuel, insurance and all that jazz, about 25,000 quid. A grand a month really, just in maintenance and repairs. Did I hope or expect for that? Absolutely not. Am I a little bit annoyed? Yes, I am. But like I said, I'm trying to maintain a philosophical approach. Most of the stuff that's happened this time round really, I think, has been in the category of bad luck. And I cannot say enough for Meridian, who at every stage along the process have helped me in every single way that they could. The reason this has taken quite so long isn't them, it is me. I have sourced parts from various different places, some that we knew we needed, some that we didn't, and this has always taken a little bit longer than you might expect. Anyone who's dealt with Italian cars will know what I'm talking about. After all of that, am I going to get rid of the car? Hell no! That would be a stupid idea. After spending all this much money, I'm going to enjoy the thing as much as I can, because as far as I'm concerned, the real cost is cost per mile. And as I've now spent a lot of money on it, the only way to reduce that is by doing more miles. There's a couple of bits I still want to sort, but they're largely cosmetic, and I'll do those next year. We've still got reasonably nice weather. Okay, it's dark now, as you may be able to tell, but I have been driving, using, and most importantly, loving this car. It's so good. I was really worried when it came back that, having experienced the F12 and the 430 for so long, this really would just feel a bit old hat. But honestly, in terms of all the things that really matter to me, driver involvement, feel, and that X factor, this scores as highly as any of the rest of them. It's a truly special car, and one I'm still very proud to say that I own. And it's a 20-odd-year-old car after all. Some of the stuff we're doing, I suppose, you could term mild restoration, and mercifully, most of it we won't have to do again. So, there's the big update on the 550. Sorry it's taken a while, but now, hopefully, you know why. I want to say a huge thank you as ever to everybody for watching. Thank you to my channel sponsor today, HelloFresh, and I hope you'll like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one, where hopefully I won't be telling you about even more money that I've spent. Bye-bye.